It wasn't a minister, it wasn't a royal, it wasn't even the king. The order came from a royal guard. He saw what Camilla's family was doing, he saw where it was headed, and he made the call no one else would. Cut them off all ties to them, strip their access, erase their presence from the crown. By the time it was over, Camilla's children were gone from every ledger, and King Charles was left in tears. Before we show you the confrontation, the signed decree, and the moment the monarchy was forced to choose, make sure you're subscribed with the bell icon turned on, and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from, because this wasn't a warning, it was a royal guard's order, and the crown obeyed. Buckingham Palace has its own kind of quiet, not peaceful, not still, just heavy, like centuries pressing down through stone and ceremony. The kind of silence that makes you hold your breath without meaning to. And on this particular Tuesday morning, that silence felt wrong, tight, like something was coiled behind the walls, waiting. Sergeant Alaric Denham felt it the moment he took his post along the Western Corridor. 58 years old, 3 tours in Helmand, 2 decades on ceremonial rotation at Buckingham, Windsor, and Balmoral. He wasn't the kind of man who needed to prove anything anymore. Stillness wasn't a discipline for him. It was second nature. A weapon he'd sharpened over 4 decades until it was invisible. But even the quiet ones know when the air changes. It had started a week ago, just whispers at first. The kind palace staff trade in the kitchens when they think no one's listening. Something about updated trust access lists that didn't match last year's entries. Denham hadn't reacted. He never did. But he'd filed it away, the way soldiers catalogue terrain before a mission. Then came the murmur near the East Wing offices. Camilla's son, Tom Parker Bowles, was apparently scheduled to review estate oversight documents alongside a royal advisor. Not unheard of, maybe, but irregular enough to itch. And then, just yesterday, Denham had passed the royal finance desk and caught a glimpse of something under a senior clerk's arm. Red seal, duchy watermark, and a single line at the bottom, half visible through the translucent cover sheet. Provisional appointment, subject to lineage clearance. The name printed above it? Laura Lopes. He didn't stop walking, didn't ask questions. Just turned the corner like he'd seen nothing at all, but the cold that settled in his chest hadn't left since. Because Buckingham Palace breathes. You can feel it in the marble under your boots, the way voices carry through the arches, the rhythm of footsteps on ancient stone. And right now, Denham felt something off in that rhythm. Footmen walking too quietly, staff glancing at doors before they spoke, aides avoiding eye contact with the guard. Something was shifting, not loudly, not yet, but enough to rattle the lines that weren't supposed to move. He stood perfectly still, red tunic immaculate, white gloves folded on the hilt of his bayonet. But inside, every instinct, honed over 4 decades, was beginning to fire. The monarchy had survived wars, abdications, scandals, even literal fire. But this felt different, quieter. Like someone was threading a needle through the seams of legacy, replacing oaths with favours, titles with influence, bloodlines with access. He'd seen what happened in war zones when boundaries blurred. Power didn't shift in loud coups. It shifted in quiet handovers, disguised as delegation. And now, standing in the heart of Britain's oldest institution, Denham recognised that same current rising beneath the polished floors. He didn't know the full shape of it yet, not yet, but he would, because a royal guard might stand still, but they don't stand blind. The convoy rolled in just before noon. 3 black Jaguars, sleek and anonymous, sliding through the forecourt without the usual fanfare. No ceremonial timing, no advance notice logged with security. Just heavy tyres on stone, and the low hum of engines that cost more than most people make in a year. Denham watched from his position along the colonnade, expression unchanged, but the shift in atmosphere was immediate. A courier, mid-stride, slowed, glancing toward the arrivals. A footman halfway through, opening a letter, froze, eyes tracking the vehicles. Even the guards on inner rotation stiffened, not out of fear, but recognition. Something was happening. Out of the second Jaguar stepped Queen Camilla, chin high, pace brisk, flanked not by palace staff or royal aides, but by her two children, Laura Lopes, expression sharp with confidence. Tom Parker Bowles, jaw set, sunglasses still on, despite being indoors. They didn't wait to be announced, didn't knock, didn't ask. They just walked straight through the royal entrance like they were returning home, not visitors, not guests, heirs. Denham's jaw didn't move, but he caught every detail. Camilla's posture was blade straight, voice crisp as she spoke to no one in particular. I expect the review documents will be brought to the Rosewood Room. My children have as much stake in this process as anyone bearing a Windsor surname. A murmur rippled near the base of the grand staircase. A private secretary hesitated mid-dial. A diplomatic liaison turned back into the hallway he'd just exited. Even the senior butler, a man with 30 years of etiquette burned into his spine, looked up from his ledger with something close to alarm. Denham noted it all, especially the fact that no one stepped forward to greet them. Inside the blue drawing room, Camilla's voice carried again, not shouting, but deliberately clear, intentionally audible. "There is precedent," she said to a circle of silent advisers. "Titles aren't the only measure of legacy. My children have served this family loyally. They deserve access to its future." Tom stayed mostly quiet, only nodding. Laura, on the other hand, set her handbag on the Queen Mother's antique console and began sorting through a stack of folders, uninvited, unacknowledged, unbothered. "Those are secure documents," one of the junior clerks stammered. Camilla didn't even look up. "Not anymore." The breath caught in the palace, not just among the staff, but in the walls themselves. This wasn't a request, this wasn't gradual integration, this was a statement, a taking. Denham remained motionless. But he watched Laura's hand rest on a stack marked Inheritance Oversight Committee. Watched Tom glance at a sealed envelope, like he already knew what was inside. Watched Camilla seat herself where the Queen Mother once sat, directly beneath a portrait of Elizabeth II, whose painted gaze suddenly felt colder than marble. That was when Denham knew. The line hadn't just been approached, it had been crossed, and they weren't planning to stop. By the time the palace quieted that evening, Sergeant Alaric Denham had already made his decision. He didn't request clearance, didn't file an inquiry. He simply waited until the west hallway emptied, until the last visiting aide had slipped into their carriage and the marble echoes gave way to nothing, and made his way down into the secured records chamber beneath the south wing. The room wasn't ornate like the rest of the palace. It didn't need to be. Concrete floors, steel drawers, reinforced ledgers. This was where the monarchy's past and present were stored, not displayed. Denham moved with purpose. He'd been stationed long enough to understand the filing structure, the way a soldier understands terrain. His boots echoed once as he stopped in front of a sealed drawer labelled Trust, Inheritance, Non-Heir Access. He entered his verification code, legacy-level access, tied to his Coldstream clearance, and waited for the magnetic lock to disengage. The drawer clicked open. He started with the print logs. Thin paper, neatly clipped, marked with the Royal Finance Office's crimson seal. Most entries were ordinary. Annual confirmations, trustee renewals, archival freeze orders. But nestled between two standard pages was a pale yellow draft, unsealed, unstamped, but typed in the correct format. Provisional inclusion of Ms. Laura Lopes, non-titled family of the Queen Consort, to the Duchy of Cornwall Oversight Board. Final review pending. Denham's eyes didn't blink. He reached deeper into the drawer and found another. Draft allocation revision. Estate holdings to include beneficiaries outside the line of succession, where determined institutionally aligned. No signature, no formal record in the digital system, just drafts, quiet ones, ghosts on paper that weren't supposed to exist yet. He moved to the electronic register next. The Palace Archive terminals were old but precise. He typed in the override key for Royal Trust Modification Queue. 4 entries appeared, all within the last 9 weeks. All labelled draft, all initiated from a secure terminal inside Camilla's private office suite. Denham stared at the screen for a long moment, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat, counting down to something inevitable. He printed everything, stapled nothing, slid the papers into a plain brown folder and tucked it beneath the inner lining of his red tunic, not for concealment, but protection. Because these weren't secrets. They were evidence. Evidence that someone had crossed into spaces they were never meant to walk. That legacy was being rewritten in soft ink and polite language. That influence was being passed off as birthright. He switched off the terminal, locked the drawer, adjusted his collar and stepped back into the dim hallway above. Because what he'd just found wasn't negligence, it was infiltration. And it was time someone stopped it. The next morning, Sergeant Alaric Denham walked past the household office without pausing. No envelope slipped under a door. No interdepartmental form. No deference to the chain of command that would strangle truth in red tape before it saw daylight. Instead, he went straight to a narrow mail slot, marked only by a small brass plate, RIL, Royal Integrity Liaison. Inside the envelope, copies of the unsigned drafts, terminal logs, and one handwritten note, neat as a soldier's bunk. Submitted under oath and institutional obligation. Discrepancy found. Legacy compromised. Sergeant A. Denham, Coldstream Guards. He didn't include a request, didn't ask for a reply. Truth doesn't beg. By midday, the response came, not from the liaison directly, but from the corridors that always speak first. Staff avoided his gaze. A palace coordinator who usually greeted him with a nod passed without a word. The air had changed again, and Denham recognized the storm gathering behind the curtain. It arrived in the form of a man in an impeccable grey suit, hair combed so precisely it looked painted on. An aide to the Queen Consort, the kind of man who smiled just a little too tightly. He approached Denham in the long hallway outside the throne room, alone except for the ticking of a grandfather clock older than Parliament. "You've caused confusion," the man said quietly, tone rehearsed. "There are procedures for this kind of concern." Denham didn't answer. The aide stepped closer. "The Queen Consort is displeased. You've reached outside your remit. Guards are meant to stand still, not stand in the way." Still nothing. The smile slipped a degree. "If you persist, reassignment isn't just possible, it's likely. And I'm sure retirement is something you've earned, so why complicate it now?" That's when Denham spoke. Calm, even, cold as winter stone. "My oath wasn't to comfort, sir. It was to the crown. And the crown doesn't pass through marriage, privilege or pressure. It passes through truth." The aide blinked, caught off guard by the precision of it. "You believe you're protecting the monarchy. I'm ensuring no one confuses access with authority." The aide stepped back, the message received. "You've made yourself very visible, Sergeant." Denham turned his head just slightly. "So has she." That was the end of it. No more words. Just the long, quiet hallway between them, and 100 years of legacy carved into every stone around them. When the man disappeared through the east door, Denham returned to stillness. But something in the palace had shifted. Not a rebellion, not a coup, just a guard, unmoving, who'd refused to flinch when silence might have been safer. And somewhere behind those walls, wheels were now turning. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do to power is refuse to be afraid of it. The summons arrived that evening, a single line, handwritten on thick cream stationery with no seal and no signature. "The Cedar Room, 0630, no aids, no deviation." Sergeant Alaric Denham folded the note and tucked it inside his glove. He didn't ask who sent it. He already knew. By dawn, he stood outside the Cedar Room, one of Buckingham's most rarely used chambers. Too intimate for ministers, too plain for royal hosting. But perfect for one thing, decisions made in silence. The door opened precisely at the hour. Inside sat Mr. Charles Havers, the Royal Integrity Liaison, posture immaculate, silver hair clipped close, glasses folded in front of him like surgical instruments. Next to him, a leather dossier sealed with red ribbon. To Havers' left sat Princess Anne, in a navy suit jacket that bore no insignia but commanded authority nonetheless. She didn't rise when Denham entered, just met his gaze with the calm of someone who'd already decided what the room meant. "Sergeant Denham," she said, voice low and clipped, "take your seat." He did. Havers undid the ribbon with slow precision, laying out the documents Denham had submitted, along with new attachments. More than Denham had expected. "We corroborated your evidence," Havers said, each word clinical. "The trust drafts are real, authored from terminals linked to Camilla's private suite. No oversight signature, no succession validation." He tapped a line with his pen. Additionally, the Duchy of Cornwall board roster was edited to include Laura Lopes as provisional trustee, scheduled for confirmation in the summer fiscal review. Anne's voice cut in like tempered steel. They weren't just testing boundaries, they were preparing to cross them in full daylight. Denham remained silent. Havers continued. "If this had gone through the household office, the investigation would have been buried. Discretion has become the enemy of preservation." At that moment, the door opened again. Prince William stepped in, dressed plainly, jaw set, expression unreadable. He didn't sit, just stood behind the chair nearest Denham, one hand resting on the backrest. "My mother warned me," William said quietly, "that public legacy would only survive if private ambition was kept outside the gate. We let it in." He turned toward Denham. "You were the only one who didn't." There was no applause, no praise, just confirmation. Anne tapped the table once. "We'll move forward, not quietly, but correctly." William leaned in, his voice firmer now. "This ends today. My stepmother's children are not part of the sovereign chain, and they will not inherit its authority, not through blood, marriage, or backroom manoeuvring." He looked directly at Denham. "But my father must be the one to act." Denham gave a single nod. "He won't be ready," Anne answered before William could. "Then we'll make sure he understands what's at stake." The decision was made. Camilla's family would be cut out, not as scandal, but as correction. And it had started with a soldier who simply refused to stay silent. Buckingham Palace did ceremony well. It had to. Centuries of tradition demanded it. But there was something different about the luncheon schedule that Friday. The table was set to perfection in the East Gallery. Glasses aligned by millimetre, florals arranged under gilded beams, ministers seated in precise diplomatic order. And yet the tension was unmistakable. Too many staff moved too quickly. Too few smiles held. Sergeant Alaric Denham was stationed along the perimeter, between the tapestry of Queen Charlotte and a stone bust of George V. It wasn't a security-heavy event, but protocol required a Coldstream presence. Denham was chosen not for his rank, but because the people who knew what was coming understood the weight his silence carried. At precisely 1 o'clock, Queen Camilla entered. She wasn't alone. Laura Lopes and Tom Parker Bowles followed 2 steps behind, dressed impeccably and seated without announcement, one at either end of the secondary table, directly opposite high-ranking Windsor staff and members of the Duchy Finance Board. It was a statement, a clear one. Prince William's gaze sharpened from his seat at the head. Princess Anne barely glanced up from her notes. Even the French trade envoy, halfway through buttering his roll, paused as if sensing something ancient and wrong had just walked into the room. Camilla settled beside Charles, who looked tired, hollow-eyed, like a man still searching for the right words, but knowing none would arrive. A few polite toasts passed. Plates clinked. A steward dropped a fork and flushed red. The Finnish minister tried to speak about agricultural policy, but the sound barely reached the end of the table. And then Denham saw it. Laura Lopes quietly pulled a folder from her handbag, stamped with the Duchy's seal, and began reviewing it over her appetizer. Across from her sat the Royal Estate Auditor. And at that moment, Denham stepped forward. His boots clicked once on the gallery floor. Every head turned. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Your Majesties," Denham said, posture straight, voice like flint, "I respectfully invoke Section 31 of the Royal Safeguard Act, governing the unauthorized presentation of non-heir advisory documentation in sovereign proceedings." The room went silent, utterly. Camilla looked up, eyebrows lifting slightly, not in surprise but in calculation. "You're interrupting a private luncheon," said, crisp. Denham didn't blink. "The document currently in use," he said, eyes on Laura's folder, "was never authorized for circulation. Its origin traces to an unsecured terminal. Its subject concerns financial roles reserved for direct heirs only. King Charles blinked once, as if surfacing from deep water. "Is this formal?" Denham met his eyes directly. "It is, Your Majesty." Anne folded her napkin with precision. William leaned back, fingers steepled under his chin. Camilla's voice lowered. "Are you accusing my family of fraud?" "I am stating," Denham replied evenly, "that legacy cannot be claimed by those who were never named." The air didn't move, not a breath, not a blink. And in that silence, something ancient stirred in the walls, because Buckingham had seen many battles, but rarely one fought across porcelain and protocol. The luncheon had ended, technically. Plates cleared, chairs pushed back, but no one had left the room. Not after what had been said. King Charles sat at the head of the table, his fingers folded so tightly they'd gone white at the knuckles. Across from him, Queen Camilla maintained her poise. Lips pursed, back straight, one hand resting on the now closed folder that had sparked it all, and yet the air was no longer hers to control. Princess Anne stood first. No theatrics, no voice raised, just a presence that drew every eye. "Your Majesty," she said calmly, though steel lined each word, "we can no longer delay what must be addressed." Camilla's gaze narrowed. Charles looked to Anne, as if begging her, with his silence, not to continue. But she did. The monarchy's inheritance is not just property and protocol. It is trust, the kind that cannot be extended to those who did not earn it through blood, duty, or sacrifice. Camilla opened her mouth, but Anne kept going. "Laura Lopes and Tom Parker Bowles," she said with clear emphasis, "are not heirs. They are not titled. They are not part of the sovereign lineage. And yet they are appearing in documents, seated at royal function, and assuming authority they were never granted." Across the room, Denham stood unmoving, his face a stone mask. Prince William rose next. No papers in hand, no legalese. Just a look that felt like it had been held back for years. "Dad, this isn't about spite, and it's not about Camilla." He let that hang. Then, "It's about what the crown means, about the difference between marrying into power and inheriting it. And it's about Mum. Because every time her sons are replaced at the table by someone who's never worn this family's weight, we fail her memory. And we cheapen the very thing she gave her life defending." Charles shut his eyes. William's voice didn't waver. "We are not saying this because we want conflict. We're saying it because if you don't act now, the institution we're meant to protect will erode from within." Camilla turned to Charles, her expression caught between fury and plea. "You promised," she whispered. "You said they'd never be cast aside." Anne didn't flinch. "Private promises," she said, "do not rewrite public legacy." Charles looked between them all, his sister, his son, his wife, and for a long moment said nothing. Then, with the slow pain of a man being pulled in two, he reached for the table. A crystal tumbler trembled in his grip as he took a sip of water, blinking once, twice. And his voice, when it came, cracked at the edges. "You've left me no choice." A single tear slipped from his right eye, silent, unannounced, and vanished into the deep groove beside his nose. Because what Anne and William had delivered wasn't just an ultimatum, it was a reckoning. And now the crown would have to choose between comfort and continuity. The cedar room had been prepared without ceremony. No press, no public audience. Just a circular table of polished oak, 8 chairs arranged with geometric precision, and a single velvet folder waiting at the centre, thick with consequence. King Charles entered first, flanked by no one. His uniform was formal but subdued, the colour of solemn declarations. His face, though composed, wore the unmistakable weight of a man about to sign away more than ink. Seated already were Mr. Charles Havers, the Royal Integrity Liaison, Princess Anne, austere as ever, Prince William, still as a statue, and Sergeant Alaric Denham, standing behind the final chair in full Coldstream dress. At Charles's right, an empty seat remained untouched. Camilla would not be attending. Mr. Havers opened the folder and laid out the decree. Revocation of privileged access and estate oversight pertaining to non-heir family members of the Queen Consort, specifically Laura Lopes and Thomas Parker Bowles. Effective immediately, all involvement in royal fiduciary matters, ceremonial representation, and administrative duties is hereby suspended until further review. Charles scanned the text slowly, as if hoping for another clause to appear, something that would soften the blow, grant him a way out. None came. Anne didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her silence was the crown itself. William leaned forward, voice quiet but firm. You taught us to preserve the institution before ourselves. This is what that means. Charles looked down at the royal seal stamped in wax. His hand trembled as he lifted the pen. A breath, a blink, a pause so long it bent time, and then he signed, not with flourish, not with finality, just a man setting ink to paper, eyes wet, jaw clenched. When he finished, he slid the decree to Mr. Havers and pressed the pen flat against the table, palm resting over it. For a moment no one moved. Then Denham stepped forward, gloved hands precise, and lifted the signed decree into a ceremonial sleeve, blue satin, stitched with the House of Windsor crest. He didn't speak, didn't bow. He just turned, boots quiet against the marble, and exited the room, carrying judgment with him. Behind him Charles sat motionless, a single tear trailing down his cheek. No one offered him a handkerchief. No one interrupted the silence. Camilla's children hadn't just lost access. They'd been written out of the institution's future, and the man who loved them, who defended them, had signed it himself. Anne finally spoke, her voice low, nearly reverent. Legacy must be earned, not invited. Charles didn't answer. He couldn't, because in that moment he was no longer a husband, he was a king again. And kings don't cry out loud. It happened quietly. No headlines, no photographs, no royal carriages, just a shift. Camilla's children, once drifting freely through the palace's inner circles, vanished from sight. No more appearances on estate review boards. No more seats at ceremonial luncheons. Their names were scrubbed from provisional trust draft, their access codes deactivate, their files marked revoked, non-heir lineage. The staff understood, without needing to be told. These things don't require announcements in Buckingham. A footman need only see a name removed from a seating chart. A steward need only watch which guest no longer has a coat hung in the vestibule. Laura Lopes was escorted from the palace's eastern corridor by 2 Crown protocol officers. She didn't argue, just walked with narrowed eyes and clenched hands, handbag clutched tightly under her arm. Tom Parker Bowles left through the south courtyard. A staff car waited, engine running. He paused only once, glancing up at the windows of the Queen's gallery, before stepping inside without a word. Camilla did not appear. She remained in her private quarters that day, and those who passed by said the curtains had been drawn shut for the first time in years. The official statement released to the public was brief. A restructuring of estate oversight and ceremonial access has been initiated to ensure alignment with direct succession. No further comment at this time. But inside the palace walls everyone knew, and at the far end of those corridors, past tapestries and marble busts, Sergeant Alaric Denham stood once more at his post. Same uniform, same stillness, same unblinking gaze. The man who had refused to stay silent now stood again in silence, not out of fear, but fulfillment. Hours later, as the sun dipped behind the western towers, a sealed envelope was placed on Denham's desk in the barracks. Inside, a folded cream card. Only 2 lines were written, in the unmistakable script of Princess Anne. You did right by the crown. Thank you for protecting what even we failed to see. Behind it was a copy of the final signed directive, now classified under Historical Royal Integrity Order 43A, filed alongside precedent rulings used only in times of crisis. It would never be spoken of publicly, but it would be remembered. That night, King Charles walked the halls alone, hands behind his back, chin lowered, footsteps measured but unsteady. He passed the drawing room without stopping, glanced at the portraits on the staircase, Elizabeth, Diana, George VI. He paused beneath his mother's likeness for just a moment, then continued on. No words, no attendants, just a man, not as a monarch, not as a husband, but as a father, who had finally understood the cost of silence. And in that silence, something old and fragile had been preserved, not with swords, not with titles, but with a single act of refusal. Now let me ask you something. Do you believe William and Anne were right to force King Charles to choose, even if it meant tearing the family apart? And should a royal guard have the power to challenge the Queen Consort herself when legacy is on the line? Let us know what you think in the comments. We read every single one. If you believe some lines should never be crossed, hit the like button right now. Subscribe with the bell icon turned on so you never miss the next unraveling behind palace doors. And don't forget to share this video with someone who still thinks royal guards just stand still and look pretty. Another investigation is already waiting for you. Click it now, and we'll see you tomorrow. Same time, same place, right here on Guard Watch. Sometimes the most important battles are fought in silence.